In July 2020, the Malmesbury Correctional Centre in South Africa erupted into chaos when around 69 trial-awaiting inmates overpowered guards during their midday exercise, locked 3 officials in a cell, and bolted through the main gate. It was wild, it was shocking, and it shook the entire nation. And yet, as insane as that mass breakout was, it doesn't even make the list of the most significant prison breaks in the nation's history. That's because South Africa's past is filled with escapes that were not just about brute force, but about breathtaking genius, incredible courage, and deception so elaborate they sound like something from a movie. So, if a chaotic stampede of nearly 70 inmates isn't at the very top, what is? Here are the 5 biggest and most unforgettable prison escapes in South African history. Let's begin with the 1963 Marshall Square escape. In the winter of 1963, South Africa was a nation suffocating under the iron grip of apartheid. The government, led by Prime Minister Hendrik Verwoerd, was ruthlessly crushing all opposition. The African National Congress, ANC, had been banned, and its leaders were either in prison, in exile, or in deep hiding. In response to the Sharpeville massacre of 1960, the ANC had formed its armed wing, Umkhonto we Sizwe, MK, or Spear of the Nation, moving from peaceful protest to a campaign of sabotage against the state. The government's security forces were on high alert, hunting for the secret headquarters of this new resistance. The nerve center of the ANC's underground operations was a quiet, unassuming 28-acre farm called Liliesleaf in the posh Johannesburg suburb of Rivonia. It was here, under the guise of a normal country estate, that top leaders of the liberation movement met to plan their next moves. To the outside world, the farm was owned by a white man named Arthur Goldreich, who lived there with his family. In reality, it was the secret sanctuary for figures like Nelson Mandela, who sometimes posed as a gardener and cook named David Matsamai. On July 11, 1963, the state struck. Acting on a tip-off, a special police unit stormed Liliesleaf Farm. It was a devastating blow to the ANC. They captured a significant portion of the MK High Command, including Walter Sisulu, Govan Beki, and Ahmed Kathrada. Among those arrested were 2 other key figures: Arthur Goldreich, an artist and the owner of the farm, and Harold Wolpe, a prominent lawyer who had helped the ANC acquire the property and manage its funds. Following the raid, the police also arrested 2 other activists connected to the movement, Mosi Mula and Abdulhai Jassat, members of the Transvaal Indian Congress who worked closely with the ANC. The men were all detained under the newly enacted 90-day detention law. This was a terrifying piece of legislation that allowed the police to hold anyone suspected of political crimes for up to 90 days without charging them, without access to a lawyer, and without a trial. The 90 days could be renewed indefinitely, meaning they could be held forever. The goal was simple: to break them down and force them to give up information about the resistance. The 4 men, Goldreich, Wolpe, Mula, and Jassat, were thrown into cells at Marshall Square. The conditions were terrible. They were held in solitary confinement, and the psychological pressure was immense. They knew that the information they possessed was vital to the survival of the liberation movement. They also knew that the police would stop at nothing to get it, and that a major political trial, which would later become the famous Rivonia trial, was being prepared against them and their comrades. They faced the very real possibility of the penalty. As the days turned into weeks, a desperate plan began to form. Escape seemed impossible. Marshall Square was a busy, functioning police headquarters, crawling with officers day and night. But as they observed the routines of the station, they noticed a potential weakness. Their fate, they realized, might lie in the hands of one of their jailers. The key to their freedom turned out to be a young, 19-year-old prison guard named Johannes Arnoldus Grief. He was a teenage police constable, impressionable, and perhaps motivated by greed or a flicker of sympathy. Harold Wolpe, the lawyer, began to carefully build a rapport with the young man. Sensing an opportunity, Wolpe made his move. He promised the young guard a substantial sum of money, 20. That was a fortune at the time. The plan was shockingly simple. Grief was scheduled to be on duty on the night of August 11, 1963. All he had to do was unlock their cell doors and look the other way as they walked out. It was an incredibly risky gamble. If Grief was loyal to the state, he would report the bribe, and the men would face even harsher punishment. But Grief agreed. At the agreed-upon time, Grief unlocked Goldreich and Wolpe's cell first. and then Mullah and Jasats. The four men slipped out of their cells and followed Grief through the corridors of the police station. Disguised in street clothes that had been smuggled in, they tried to look as casual as possible. They walked right past the front desk, offered a simple good night to the officer on duty, and stepped out into the cold night air of Johannesburg. They were free. The discovery of the empty cells the next morning sent shockwaves through the apartheid government. It was a monumental embarrassment. They had captured the leaders of the resistance, only to let four of them simply walk out the front door of a major police station. A massive manhunt was launched, with roadblocks set up across the country. The four escapees, meanwhile, had slipped into the ANC's underground network. They were hidden in safe houses across Johannesburg, constantly moving to avoid capture. Goldreich and Wolpe, being white, had a slightly easier time blending in. They famously disguised themselves as priests and, with the help of the anti-apartheid underground, made a perilous journey east across the border into Swaziland, now Eswatini. From there, they chartered a plane to fly to Botswana, then Bechuanaland. However, their drama wasn't over. South African agents sabotaged their plane in Botswana, but miraculously, they survived the crash. They eventually made it to Tanzania, and finally to London, where they continued to fight against apartheid from exile. Mullah and Jasat also managed to escape the country, eventually finding their way to safety abroad. None of them were ever recaptured. At number 4, we have the 1979 Pretoria prison escape. If the 1963 Marshall Square escape was a swift blow against the state, achieved through a simple bribe, the next great escape of the apartheid era would be something else entirely. It was a slow, methodical, and breathtaking act of genius. It required no outside help, no bought guards, and no violence. And that's the 1979 Pretoria prison escape. This escape involved 3 men, Tim Jenkin, Stephen Lee, and Alex Mumberis. To understand the escape, you must first understand the men and their crime. Tim Jenkin and Stephen Lee were 2 young, white, university-educated South Africans from privileged backgrounds. Horrified by the brutal injustice of the apartheid system, they made a conscious decision to join the banned African National Congress, ANC. Along with Alex Mumberis, a French national who would also join the struggle, their mission was not one of violence, but of psychological warfare. They were part of a secret ANC unit that specialized in creating and detonating leaflet bombs. These were not explosive devices designed to harm people. Instead, they were harmless contraptions that used a small chemical timer to explode and shower bustling city streets with thousands of anti-apartheid pamphlets. It was a way to spread the message of the resistance and show the public that the ANC was still active, despite the government's attempts to crush it. In 1978, their luck ran out. They were caught, arrested, and put on trial. For their act of spreading ideas, Jenkin was sentenced to 12 years in prison, and Lee was sentenced to 8. Mumberis, who was involved in more direct MK operations, received a 12-year sentence. They were sent to Pretoria Central Prison, a facility with a terrifying reputation. The section for white political prisoners was known as the White Man's Robben Island. It was a prison within a prison, a modern fortress built to hold the most defiant opponents of the apartheid regime. The security was considered flawless. Escape was thought to be impossible. Inside the walls of Pretoria Central, the men realized that serving their long sentences was not an option. As soldiers of the ANC, they believed it was their duty to escape and rejoin the struggle. The question was, how? The prison was a maze of steel. Heavy, impenetrable doors stood between them and the outside world. The idea, which at first seemed insane, came from Tim Jenkin, a man who was obsessed with the prison's locks. He noticed that all the locks were old, simple pin tumbler locks. He reasoned that if he could see the key, or somehow get an impression of its shape, he might be able to replicate it. The plan was born. It was as simple as it was audacious. They would make wooden keys for every single door that stood in their way. Their greatest advantage was that as prisoners, they were assigned to work in the prison's workshops. Jenkin worked in the wood workshop, which gave him access to the perfect raw material. The long, painstaking process began. The first step was to get a good look at a key. Jenkin managed this by getting a guard to show him the key to the workshop. He quickly memorized its basic shape and dimensions. Back in his cell, using a piece of wood smuggled from the workshop and a small chisel he had fashioned, he began to carve his first prototype. For 18 long months, This became their secret life. During the day, they were model prisoners. At night, their cells transformed into secret workshops. They carved key after key from scraps of wood. The process was agonizingly slow and filled with constant tension. A key would break. The wood would be too soft. They had to experiment with different types of wood to find one strong enough to turn the stiff, old locks. They hid their growing collection of keys in the hollowed-out bottoms of containers and other secret nooks in their cells. The most nerve-wracking part was testing them. Late at night, when the guards were not on their rounds, Jenkins would stand by his cell door, insert a wooden key, and gently try to turn it. The first time he heard the faint click of the lock tumblers moving, it was the most beautiful sound in the world. It was the sound of hope. One by one, they crafted and tested keys for an astonishing 10 different steel doors. As 1979 drew to a close, they were ready. They chose a night in December, right before Christmas. They knew the prison would be quieter, and the guards would be more relaxed and less attentive. On the chosen night, the three men ate their last prison meal. They waited in their cells until the final patrol had passed. Then, it was time. Jenkins took out the first wooden key, inserted it into his cell door lock, and turned. It clicked open. He quietly let himself out and proceeded to open the cells for Lee and Moombaris. They were now in the corridor, a place they were never supposed to be at night. They moved like ghosts through the silent prison, approaching the first of the many doors that led to the outside. At each door, Jenkins would pull out the corresponding numbered wooden key. The tension was almost unbearable. Some locks turned easily. Others were stiff and required a terrifying amount of force, risking the key snapping at any second. Door after door, they successfully unlocked their way through the prison's layers of security. They reached the final door, the one that led to the main courtyard and freedom. This was the moment of crisis. The lock was old and jammed. Jenkins inserted the key and turned, but the pressure was too much. The head of the wooden key snapped off. For a horrifying moment, they thought their entire 18-month effort had failed at the very last step. But thinking quickly, Jenkins used the shaft of the broken key to push the broken piece out. With a bit more work and a metal tool they had, they finally managed to turn the lock. They simply walked out of the front entrance of Pretoria Central Prison and into the cool night air. They were free. Their escape immediately triggered one of the biggest manhunts in South African history. But the trio had a head start and a plan. They were met by the ANC's underground network, which hid them and began the process of smuggling them out of the country. They traveled overland, eventually crossing the border into Mozambique and then onward to Zambia. Tim Jenkins, Stephen Lee, and Alex Moombaris were never recaptured. They made their way to London, where they immediately reported for duty at the ANC's international headquarters. They continued to work for the anti-apartheid movement for the rest of the struggle. Next prison escape we will be looking at is that of Andre Stander, which happened in 1983. Andre Stander was, by all accounts, a golden boy. He was handsome, intelligent, and came from a respected family. His father was a major general in the South African police. Stander followed in his father's footsteps, quickly rising through the ranks to become a police captain. He was the head of the Kempton Park Criminal Investigation Department, CID, one of the youngest officers to ever hold the position. He was seen as a brilliant detective, a man destined for the very top. But beneath the surface, something was deeply wrong. In 1976, Stander was sent to police the riots in the township of Tembisa. The violence and brutality he witnessed and participated in seemed to break something inside him. He grew cynical and disillusioned with the very system he had sworn to protect. He felt a profound sense of emptiness and began to crave excitement and adrenaline, something his life as a detective no longer provided. So, he decided to create his own. In 1977, Andre Stander began living an astonishing double life. By day, he was a respected police captain. But during his lunch breaks, he would disguise himself with a wig and a fake beard, walk into a bank, and rob it at point. His methods were calm, efficient, and incredibly bold. He would then get back in his car, drive back to the police station, and often, he would be the very officer who was assigned to investigate the robbery he had just committed. This went on for 3 years. He used his intimate knowledge of police procedures and alarm systems to his advantage, staying one step ahead of his own colleagues. It was an exhilarating game for him. He robbed nearly 30 banks, not because he needed the money, but for the sheer thrill of it. Eventually, however, his luck ran out. A fellow officer recognized him from bank security footage, and the Golden Boy's secret life came crashing down. In 1980, Andre Stander was convicted and sentenced to an incredible 75 years in prison. Stander was sent to Zonderwater Maximum Security Prison, but a man like him was never going to quietly serve his time. Inside, he met two other hardened criminals, Patrick Lee McCall, a hot-headed bank robber, and Alan Hale, a cool-headed and intelligent fellow robber. The three men bonded and began to plot. Their chance came on August 11, 1983. Stander and McCall complained of serious back injuries and were scheduled for a physiotherapy appointment at a facility outside the prison. It was all a setup. Left with only a couple of guards, the two physically fit criminals easily overpowered them. They took the guards' firearms, locked them up, and simply drove away in the transport vehicle. They were free, but Stander wasn't finished. His first act as a free man was to return to the prison a few months later, on October 31, 1983, and brazenly break Alan Hale out as well. The trio was reunited on the outside, and with that, the infamous Stander Gang was born. What followed was one of the most legendary and audacious crime sprees in South African history. The Stander Gang began robbing banks at a dizzying pace, sometimes hitting as many as 4 in a single day. They were unlike any criminals the country had ever seen. They were fast, professional, and completely fearless. They would run into a bank, be out with the cash in under 2 minutes, and disappear without a trace. But this wild ride could not last forever. The police, humiliated and furious, put together a special task force to hunt them down. The net began to close in. In late January 1984, the police tracked Patrick McCall to one of their hideouts. In a fierce shootout, McCall was Alan Hale managed to flee the country, escaping to Greece, then England, where he was eventually caught years later and extradited back to South Africa to serve out his sentence. Andre Stander also managed to escape the country. He flew to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, in the United States, hoping to start a new life. But the thrill of the crime was an addiction he couldn't shake. After being identified by the American police, he was pulled over during a routine traffic stop. In a final, desperate act, Stander tried to grab the officer's. In the struggle that followed, Andre Stander was he bled to death on a wet American street. At number 2, we have the insane Ananias Math. In 2006, it was a breakout so unbelievable that it would earn its perpetrator a legendary nickname and leave the nation asking a simple question: how is this even possible? Before he was an escape artist, Ananias Math was a predator. A former soldier from Mozambique, Math had unleashed a terrifying crime wave in South Africa. He was a serial armed robber and linked to more than 70 brutal crimes. His method was to break into homes, where he would subject his victims to horrific ordeals. He was a dangerous, violent, and highly feared criminal. When he was finally captured, the authorities knew they could not take any chances. Math was sent to the A6 section of Pretoria Central Prison, a super maximum security facility known simply as CMAT. CMAX was South Africa's answer to prisons like Alcatraz or ADX Florence. It was a concrete and steel fortress, a technologically advanced cage built for the worst of the worst. Every door was electronic, every corridor was monitored by cameras, and every prisoner was held in solitary confinement for 23 hours a day. It was considered completely and utterly escape-proof. In its history, not a single person had ever managed to break out. On the morning of November 18, 2006, prison guards doing their morning rounds walked past Math's cell and saw that his bed was occupied. Everything looked normal. It was only later that they discovered the body in the bed was a dummy made of clothes and sheets. The real Ananias Math was gone. The authorities were in a state of stunned disbelief. As they pieced together the evidence, an almost superhuman story emerged, one that would make headlines around the world. According to the initial official account, this is how he did it. Math, a powerfully built man, had managed to break off 2 steel bars from his bed. Using these as tools, he chipped away at the concrete wall around his cell's small window frame. He then stripped completely naked and, in an act that would define his legend, smeared his entire body with a thick layer of petroleum jelly, Vaseline, to act as a lubricant. He then proceeded to squeeze his muscular body through a tiny window that measured just 20 centimeters by 60 centimeters. But that was only the beginning. He dropped down into a small, enclosed courtyard. From there, he used his bed bars to punch a hole through an interior brick wall to access another section. He then scaled down several walls and fences, reportedly using a rope made from his own clothes and bed sheets. He navigated the prison's perimeter, avoided the guards, and melted into the night. The story was so incredible that it seemed impossible. The media and the public were captivated. Ananias Math was instantly nicknamed Houdini, after the world's most famous escape artist. He had done what no one thought possible. He had escaped the inescapable prison. The news of Math's escape sparked a nationwide panic. A dangerous and violent criminal was on the loose, and the police launched one of the most extensive manhunts the country had ever seen. His face was plastered on every newspaper and television screen. As the hunt continued, however, a different and more disturbing version of the escape story began to emerge. Seasoned security experts and prison officials started to question the Houdini narrative. Could a man of Math's size really fit through such a small opening? How did he bypass all the electronic security without raising a single alarm? The truth, which came out during later investigations and court cases, was perhaps even more shocking than the myth. The Houdini escape was likely a lie, a cover-up for something far more common and corrupt. It was revealed that Math had likely paid massive bribes, estimated to be around 80 rands, to several prison guards. These guards had simply unlocked a series of secure doors for him, allowing him to effectively walk out of CMAX. The story of the Vaseline and the tiny window was a fantastic tale concocted to hide the fact that the country's most secure prison had been defeated not by genius, but by greed. Whether by magic or by money, Math was free. For nearly 3 weeks, he managed to evade the massive police dragnet. His freedom came to a dramatic end on December 4, 2006. Acting on a tip-off, police tracked him to the Johannesburg suburb of Crayhall. Math, who was driving a stolen car, tried to flee. In the ensuing chase, he was shot 3 times by police before he was finally cornered and recaptured. Ananias Math was sent back to prison, this time to the super-maximum security Ebongweni prison in KwaZulu-Natal, where he remained under even tighter watch. He was sentenced to 54 years for his original crimes. He attempted to escape again in 2013 but failed. In December 2016, Ananias Math died in a Durban hospital from natural causes, his days of escaping finally over. The next great prison escape to rock South Africa, however, was in a league of its own. And it was Thabo Bester who orchestrated it. That's why he is at the very top of our list. In his early life, Thabo was a handsome, charismatic, and highly intelligent con artist with a deeply sinister side. In the early 2010s, he built a sophisticated scam targeting aspiring models. Using Facebook, he would pose as a talent scout for high-profile international modeling agencies. He created a fantasy world, promising young women glamorous photo shoots and lucrative careers overseas. Once he had gained their trust, he would arrange to meet them. The dream would then turn into a nightmare. He would rob his victims and, in several cases, brutally assault them. His crime spree came to an end after he robbed and murdered his then-girlfriend, model Namfundo Taihulu, in a bed and breakfast in Cape Town. In 2012, he was convicted of rape and murder and sentenced to life in prison. The country thought a dangerous predator was off the streets for good. Bester was incarcerated at the Mangang Correctional Centre, a maximum security prison near Bloemfontein. It is important to note that this is a private prison, run and managed by the global security firm G4S. This detail would become a crucial element in the scandal that followed. Even behind bars, Bester's manipulative charisma continued to work its magic. While in prison, he started a relationship with Dr. Nandifa Magudumana, a well-known and glamorous celebrity doctor with a successful aesthetic clinic. Their relationship blossomed, and soon they began to orchestrate an escape plan so elaborate and audacious it sounds like something from a Hollywood movie. Bester, even from his cell, was running a sham media company with Magudumana, conning people into paying millions for non-existent projects. But this was just a prelude to their master plan. On the morning of May 3, 2022, the news was straightforward and final. The Department of Correctional Services issued a statement announcing that inmate Thabo Bester had died in his cell. The official report stated that a fire had broken out in cell 35 during the night. After the flames were extinguished, a body was found, burned beyond recognition. The cause of death was listed as Thabo Bester, the Facebook rapist, was dead. The case was officially closed. For almost a year, the world believed this to be the truth. But behind the scenes, the first clues of the deception were already emerging, largely ignored by the authorities. Nandifa Magudumana had come forward to claim the charred body, presenting an affidavit stating she was Bester's customary wife. When the police refused to release the body to her, she took the matter to court. It was an unusual amount of effort for a man who had supposedly just. The truth would likely have remained buried forever, if not for the tenacious work of journalists Maracia Damons and Daniel Stain from the small, independent news organization ground up. In early 2023, acting on tips, they began digging into the strange circumstances surrounding Bester's death. What they found was explosive. They uncovered the post-mortem report for the body found in the cell. It revealed two shocking facts. First, the person had died from a blunt force injury to the head before the fire was even started. Second, a DNA analysis of the body, which was never made public, confirmed that it did not belong to Thabo Bester. The man in the cell was a stranger. The story broke in March 2023. The journalist published a photograph that sent shockwaves across South Africa. It showed a man who looked exactly like Thabo Bester, shopping calmly in a Woolworths supermarket in Sandton, Johannesburg. The picture had been taken 2 months after he had supposedly burned to death in his cell. The official story crumbled, and the unbelievable truth of the escape was revealed. This was not a simple breakout. It was a meticulously planned operation that required a high level of inside help. The plot involved several key stages. First, a body had to be acquired. It is believed that Dr. Nandifa claimed an unclaimed body from a morgue, which was then smuggled into the Mangaung prison. It is thought the body was brought inside, hidden within a piece of furniture, like a TV stand. On the night of the escape, Bester placed the body in his bed in cell 35 and set the mattress on fire to create the illusion of a and to burn the evidence. While the prison was in chaos dealing with the fire, Bester, allegedly dressed in a prison warder's uniform, simply walked out. Investigations later revealed that the CCTV cameras covering that specific section were conveniently not working that night, and multiple officials allegedly helped facilitate his passage through several security gates. He walked out of the front entrance of a maximum security prison as a free man. For nearly a year, Thabo Bester and Dr. Nandifa Magudumana lived a life of unimaginable luxury. They rented a lavish mansion in a wealthy Johannesburg suburb for 40 rands a month, and were seen driving luxury cars like a Porsche and a Mercedes-Benz. When the ground-up story broke and the nation erupted in outrage, the couple went on the run. An international manhunt was launched. Their escape was finally brought to an end on April 7, 2023. Acting on intelligence, Tanzanian police, working with Interpol, arrested Thabo Bester and Dr. Nandifa Magudumana in the city of Arusha, close to the Kenyan border. They were found in possession of multiple fake passports and were preparing to flee to a neighboring country. The fallout from their capture has been a national scandal of epic proportions. The case has exposed breathtaking corruption within the private prison company G4S and incompetence within the government's Department of Correctional Services.